Mr. Speaker, members, we are legislating something that is not an issue here in Texas. And there are already regulations in place on the national level, and we are ignoring actual issues that are going on right now in women's sports. There are less resources, less funding, and more sexual harassment prevalent in women's sports. And instead of focusing on those very important issues, we are instead focusing on harming an already vulnerable group. Transgender athletes in intercollegiate sports have been brought under scrutiny ever since politicians and other folks have used them as pawns in our political games. These athletes are not a threat to women's sports. The NCAA, the NAIA, and many other athletic governing boards have laid out regulations for a fair and equitable athletic competition between all athletes, regardless of being cisgender or transgender. I have to reemphasize that the governing boards are already doing what we are already addressing, equity and fairness. So what we need to do is really stay out of their way, not be big government. This bill seeks to supersede what each of the governing boards
Mr. Toth, for what purpose?
Will the gentlelady yield for some questions?
May I finish?
You bet.
After she finishes.
This board seeks to supersede which each governing board is already doing or has done, and instead place a strict ban on transgender athletes. This is incredibly harmful for a multitude of reasons. First, women's sports as a whole suffer when transgender students are excluded. For example, a study done in 2021 shows that trans-inclusive athletic policies have higher participation rates in all sports for all girls, not just transgender women. This bill would place a microscope on all female athletes by allowing anyone to bring civil action against a university or team that they believe might have allowed a transgender athlete on their team. Every female athlete would then have to be conscious of their hormone levels, their physical abilities in their sports, or if they appeal to the overall ideal of femininity. If for whatever reason a single person believes that a university or team is in violation of this bill, they can take the institution or sports team to court without any proof. The implementation of this legislation would also be an ineffective use of our state funds. Under this legislation, the Higher Education Coordinating Board would be tasked with a regulation of intercollegiate athletics. This is something they have never been tasked with before.
Members, please take your conversations outside the room.
Texas public institutions in certain sports, Texas public institution would be operating regulations that are directly contradictory to the NCAA, the NAIA, and which would create disadvantages specifically for our out-of-state institutions. Once again, this body is faced with a decision on a piece of legislation that relies on fear and misinformation to support writing discrimination into our law. A bill that does not solve any documented problems in Texas and address an issue that has already been addressed by the experts and the intercollegiate athletic leaders that we have. This discriminatory bill is motivated to an attempt to affect one small, vulnerable population of Texas. I urge you to consider if this is really about protecting women's sports. Like I mentioned in the beginning, there are very real things that we should be addressing when it comes to women's sports, or if it's really about, and if not, then what is this really about? And what is our role here in this legislature, in this building and on this floor? Please vote no on this bill. It is doing nothing but harming Texas universities, the Texas economy, and most importantly, Texas women.